We are a justice-making, truth-seeking people. We gather as a community of believers and seekers. We share a reverence for the mystery of life. We are building the beloved community. Come, let us worship together.
In the stillness of this moment, we light our chalice, whose glow, like that of the summer sun, shines on us all. May this time together open us to the wonder and promise of this day. Please rise and body our spirit for our first hymn, number 352, Find the Stillness.
On June 21st, a few days from now, the time from sunrise to sunset will be just under 15 hours and 17 minutes. That will be the longest amount of sunshine in one day for all of 2022. That day is the summer solstice. The name solstice comes from two Latin words, sol, meaning our sun, of course, and sistere, meaning to stop. This morning, Teresa and I will look at what it means when the sun comes to a stop. Now, first of all, I want to make sure we're all on the same page, so indulge my inner professor and let's make sure we all understand the science behind the solstice. Now, I'm no Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'm no Neb Durek, but I used to walk past Carl Sagan's house frequently, way back when I lived in Ithaca, New York. So that will have to do for credentials. So what does it mean for the sun to stop? Of course, that huge ball of nuclear fusion hurtling through the cosmos doesn't actually come to a stop. What comes to a stop is the seasonal progress of the sun through the sky from our earthbound perspective. In the northern hemisphere, from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, the sun at noon is higher and higher above the horizon each day. And then, of course, from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the sun at noon is lower and lower each day. The opposite is true in the southern hemisphere. This is due to a quirk of the Earth's geometrical relationship to the sun that is best shown with the picture. So, the Earth spins around an axis. That axis is tilted by about 23.5 degrees to the plane of the orbit that the Earth orbits around the sun. When the Earth is on one side of the sun, the northern hemisphere is tipped away from the direct rays of the sun, so the sun shows up lower on the horizon and doesn't warm the northern hemisphere as efficiently. That is the winter solstice. Advanced. When the Earth swings around to the other side of the orbit, just the opposite is true. The northern hemisphere is tipped toward the rays of the sun, so the sun appears higher on the horizon, and it warms the northern hemisphere more directly. I should point out that this diagram is not to scale. So why does it look like the sun stops to us earthbound observers? We can show that by measuring the hours between sunrise and sunset as the Earth progresses around the sun and plotting each of those measurements for each day of the year. Here's what the measurement data looks like for the last couple of years. With all those circles and angles involved, of course, the curve looks like a sine curve. So the peaks of the curve are the longest days, the summer solstice. The valleys are the shortest days, the winter solstice. And halfway between those points are the equinoxes. During the solstice, the slope of that curve is zero. It is neither rising nor falling. It is the point between coming and going. And you don't have to be a mathematician to know that if you are not coming and you are not going, you are standing still. It's only through established astronomical convention that we say the summer starts on the solstice, this year, June 21st. But we, of course, all know that the summer goes from the end of May to the beginning of September. That's because we base that based on the temperature. If we add the daily high temperature to our plot of daylight hours, we see that the high temperature has a similar shape, but it lags the daylight hours by a few weeks. That is kind of like when you turn on your oven, when you heat it up. It takes a few minutes to get to the temperature that you're aiming at. Same with the summer heat. So you see from here that you can expect summer-like temperatures from the end of May to the beginning of September, just a little bit off position from the solstice. Oh, and one footnote. In some European cultures, June 24th is referred to as Midsummer's Eve. Now, that gives me some math headache, because if the summer starts on the 21st and Midsummer's Eve is June 24th, then summer is only 7 days long. Now, it might seem that way from a perspective of autumn, but this is only from an old convention where the solstice was considered the middle of the summer, but that was offset by a few days when some pope rejiggered the calendar. Now, before anyone asks the obvious question, the answer is yes, this will be on the exam. The mission of Birmingham Unitarian Church is to be a free and welcoming religious community that encourages lives of integrity, learning, service, and joy. One way we live out this mission is by giving half of our weekly offering to a nonprofit organization that shares our values and addresses needs in one of these areas: environmental action, economic justice, civic engagement, and racial justice. We support a new organization each month. This month's plate collection recipient is the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. MEJC works to achieve a clean, healthy, and safe environment for those Michigan residents who suffer the greatest impacts of climate change and inadequate economic policies. MEJC builds power and unity within our community so we all can thrive. Major programs of MEJC include community education, political advocacy, and energy justice. Let there be an offering in support of our beloved community and organizations that build the world we dream about. This morning's offering will now be received with gratitude. Ushers, please come forward. We are a church of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. With gratitude, we dedicate this offering to the good works of our congregation and dedicate ourselves to its service.
We come to the time of our service to set aside for centering and spiritual practice. We begin with the sharing of joys and sorrows. This from the racial justice team. Today we honor all who celebrate Juneteenth, also known as Black Emancipation Day. There was an in-between time from July 4th, 1776, until June 19th, 1856, during which people continued to be held in slavery until word reached Texas that they had been freed by the Emancipation Proclamation 2.5 years earlier. Today, we recommit to a fuller liberation for their descendants. The work continues together. And from Larry Larson, who is also celebrating Juneteenth today. So good for Larry to make note of that. But he also wants to wish everyone a happy Father's Day and to remind people that this is Pride Month. Reverend Mandy shared earlier in the week that Nancy Norling had died. She and her husband Dick joined our congregation in 1999 and were very actively involved until Dick's health began to decline. He died in 2019, and then Nancy began attending services again. She loved being a part of our community and was involved in many fellowship activities. We learned this week that she had died on November 16th, 2021. There was no service or obituary for her, but she was known and beloved here, so we honor her memory. Reverend Mandy also shared that Betty Blair has died. She was 94 and died peacefully at home, surrounded by friends. Betty became a member of BUC in 2001 through her friends, who were also involved with Detroit Chamber Winds and Strings. She and her late husband Art served as greeters many Sunday mornings. She also participated in the congregation's tutoring program at Walt Whitman Elementary School. She will be long remembered as an ardent supporter of our music ministry. She was a lover of cats, literature, and music. A service is being planned for July, with more information to come. Let us now enter into a spirit of prayer and meditation with these words by Reverend Sarah Eileen Lawal. Spirit of life and love, in the silence and the stillness, we hear the call of our own heart, its tender dreams, its sorrows and its triumphs. In the silence and the stillness of dreams still becoming the promise of the future. We celebrate together our individual journeys and dreams and our collective ones, knowing the journey is so much richer with others to share it. In the name of all that is holy, we pray. Amen. Let's pause for a moment of silence. Today's first reading is by the Catholic priest, Edward Hayes, who is the author of over 30 books on contemporary spirituality. This is an excerpt from his book, Prayers for a Planetary Pilgrim. In the Northern Hemisphere, the season of summer begins on about June 21st and extends to September 23rd. The intense rays of the sun reach the northernmost tip of our planet on the June summer solstice. And because the northern half of our planet tilts fully towards the sun, the hours of sunlight are the longest on this day, and the hours of darkness the shortest. From our vantage point, it appears that the sun stops at the peak of its northward journey. For several days it lingers at this point, and then slowly appears to move southward. Our ancestors, who lived in harmony with the sun and moon, knew within their bones the sacredness of such times. The eve of June 21 was a night of magic and feasting. Deep within our bodies, the memories of those sun feasts are still alive. We are children of the sun, the day star that makes all life possible as we travel in the icy darkness of frozen space. It is only fitting that we celebrate this turning point of our planet, even if we have a more sophisticated knowledge of Earth, sun, moon, and planets than did our ancestors. Many celebrate solstice with rituals, and Father Hayes was sensitive to that and wrote a ritual for the summer solstice and a reading that could be used in it. Holy is the fire of this midsummer's eve, and how holy are you, O God. From your burning heart, you drew forth a fiery ball and flung it into space. Your laughter shook the empty cosmos and echoed again and again until the darkness of space resounded with your love and fire. You reached in again and drew forth fire and seeded it like yeast in each atom, plant and animal, each bird, fish, man, and woman. And you gave us a special star, our sun, a flame with life-evoking energy to make our planet green and fertile, sun-soaked in your love. As we celebrate this solstice feast, open our eyes to the countless wonders and to the sparks of fire life that you have planted in each of us. May this holy and magical night be aglow with star fire and godlight as we once again begin the sacred season of summer. The summer solstice has been celebrated around the world from ancient times to today. It is thought that Stonehenge, erected during the Neolithic era, was the site of solstice rituals because of the way the stones are oriented, and the light of the ascending sun shines in a particular point on a stone in Stonehenge. It's still one of the great mysteries that cannot be explained. Now, in Northern and Central European Neolithic cultures, the summer solstice may have been related to crop cycles. It was particularly marked by Celtic, Slavic, and Germanic people by lighting bonfires intended to boost the sun's strength for the remainder of the crop season and to ensure a healthy harvest. During the Inca Empire, the people took note of the solstices, matching each stage of the agricultural process with the 4 annual solar events. Notable too were the religious celebration held for Inti, the sun god, asking for a good season for their crops. There are more examples that I could cite, but why this universal need to celebrate these astronomical events? From the dawn of humankind, we have been trying to find explanations for the natural mysteries that surround us. Why is there day and night? Why is there summer and winter? What are the visible and unseen forces of which we are a part? The people of the early times observed the world and noted there was a seemingly endless day during midsummer and the same for dark in the midwinter time. They named these invisible forces and bestowed upon them a place in important rituals, rituals that helped them feel safe and in control. To paraphrase Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Robert Fulgham, everybody leads a ritualized life. Rituals are repeated patterns of meaningful acts, and the patterns of rituals, enriched by the meaning that we give them, become sacred. As Chris described for you, this concept of stillness embodied in the lantern was noticed by the ancients, and they marveled at how the sun seemed to stop for time, to be still. Stillness in this sense is the pause before the tilt of the Earth's axis that gives us the most sunlight and takes us on the path to the longest year. Is stillness ever really achievable? As we sit on this Earth we call home, our bodies may seem still, but the Earth is orbiting the sun as it spins on its axis, and the sun is orbiting the Milky Way and spinning on its axis. And even though our body may be physically still relative to everything around us, there is motion going on inside of us, atoms and cells and physiological processes flowing, pumping, and moving all the time. So like the solstice, stillness is just a pause. When we breathe, it is the slight pause between the inhale and the exhale. It is the pause between being awake and asleep. It is the slight glimmer of the sun on the horizon just before daybreak. So night, day, winter, summer, women, men, young, old, when we define all of these as opposites, our brains lead us to think of the word oppositional. When we use the term polar opposites, our minds think of two things that are so far apart that conflict is inevitable, like that between the Oak King and the Holly King in some Celtic-based stories. These two have a never-ending battle, a fight for supremacy of the wheel of the year as the wheel of the year turns each season. The Holly King defeats the Oak King at the autumnal equinox and reaches his greatest power at the winter solstice. His reign ends when the Oak King returns at the spring equinox and is triumphant in battle. The Oak King, like the Holly King, will reign for a brief time until his defeat in the fall. Cycle within cycle, opposites, oppositional, opponents endlessly. So let's think of this in a different way. Polarity is actually defined as two things that are opposite, but they exist in relationship. It reminds me of the relationship between yin and yang. The reference site Thought Company provides this description. Yin and yang elements come in pairs, such as the moon and the sun, female and male, dark and bright, cold and hot, passive and active, and so on. But note that yin and yang are not static or mutually exclusive terms. While the world is composed of many different, sometimes opposing forces, these can coexist and even complement each other. Sometimes forces opposite in nature even rely on one another to exist. The nature of yin and yang lies in the interplay of the two components. The alternation of day and light is just such an example. There cannot be shadow without light. This is where we come back to stillness. One yoga teacher has described stillness this way. When we are practicing yoga breathing, there is that pause that I mentioned earlier that we take after an inhalation, and that same pause we take at the end of an exhalation. In that pause between opposite forces and inhaling and exhaling, there is stillness. The summer solstice begins on Tuesday, as you know, so please revel in and enjoy this day of greatest sunlight.
In Shakespeare's play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, he explores that liminal space between the world of humans and the world of fairies and spirits, the edge of awareness where the colors of chaotic fantasy bleed into the fabric of mundane reality. Ironically, Shakespeare picks the most reality-bound character, Theseus, to explain the world of fantasy. Theseus says, "Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are, of imagination, all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That is the madman. The lover, all as frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name." Through Theseus's words, Shakespeare implies that it takes a special kind of person to cross the border between reality and fantasy. He contrasts the ability of cool reason to comprehend, to know what is, with the ability of imagination to apprehend, to conjure what might be. He cites the lunatic and the lover and the poet as specialists in this realm of fantasy, but then spends the bulk of his words expounding on the poet's special talents in this area. Go figure. The poet's imagination, he says, can take things that are unknown and turn them into shapes with names. I really like the idea that there is a world of reality and there's a world of fantasy, and I agree that poets are expert at crossing that boundary between the two, and by doing so show us something beyond what simply is. But I don't think you have to be a poet to cross that boundary. Whether you are a poet or an engineer or a musician or a gardener, you see what is, but you dream what might be. Poets simply dream out loud. I believe creativity thrives on this border between reality and fantasy. If you can balance there, too far to the side of cool reason are deserts of certainty. Too far to the side of the seething brain is the abyss of insanity. Now, it is no accident that Shakespeare places his story in midsummer, what we call the summer solstice. He and most ancient cultures all around the world knew that the boundary between reality and fantasy is most permeable around this time of year. I can't begin to explain why this is so, but I know that it to be true for myself from very direct experience. I think I was around 10 years old when I first recognized that time when imagination bodies forth the form of things unknown. Oddly enough, this magical and memorable experience is all because of the mundane reality that the house I grew up in didn't have central air conditioning. I grew up in Buffalo, widely known for its harsh winters, but also known by its residents for its rainforest-like summers. In my sweltering second-floor bedroom, I would lie there in complete stillness, waiting for the next feeble breeze to limp through the window and endow a meager coolness as it breathed its last breath on my skin. Some might consider this a kind of torture, but I remember it as magical. It was magical because the open window also let in the night sounds. You see, only a couple of miles away from my childhood home was a huge railway switching yard, several square miles of tracks and sidings. In the daytime, I never noticed the sounds emanating from all that activity of moving rail cars around the switching yard. But at night, they were like distant fireworks. The squeal of train brakes would arc across the nighttime blackness like Roman candles, the echoes a tale of smoke dissipating in the wind. The shuddering thud of 100-car strings coupling with ones just as long could be felt like an exploding shell. The palpable thrum of laboring diesels would crescendo and decrescendo with the fickle wind. Against that backdrop, there was no limit to where my mind could roam. Plans for the next day with my friends, winning the 100 freestyle in the next swim meet against the town park team, the unfolding of my career as a rock star, no limit. To this day, I am reluctant to close my windows and turn on the AC when the temperatures start climbing at midsummer. This, to the deep dismay of my family. The night sounds still fill me with the openness to possibility that I remember from childhood. These days, the sounds are different. An occasional faint horn blast of a grade crossing in Royal Oak is the only train sounds. There's traffic noise from Losser and the wind chime on our front porch. Sometimes there is even the neighbor's late-night leaf blowing. That still has its own magic. But I will admit now, the magic is more brittle, easily shattered by a stray worry or a buzzing phone or the weight of a busy tomorrow. Now, although it works for me at times, I am not recommending that you swelter in your sheets as a spiritual exercise this coming solstice. But I do hope that you take the time this summer to cherish a moment of stillness, to teeter on the point where the slope is zero, to be neither coming nor going, to pause in between. Find that openness to possibility that lives between what is and what might be. And I wish you a fantastic summer. Now, please stand and join in singing hymn number 66 in the Great Hymnal, When the Summer Sun is Shining. We extinguish our chalice this morning to the words of Amy Zucker Morgenstern. Blessed is the dark in which our dreams stir and are revealed. Blessed is the dark of earth where seeds come to life. Blessed are the depths of the ocean where no light shimmers, the womb of all earthly life. Blessed is the light into which we awake, the light that sparkles on the waters, that calls the tree forth from the seed and calls the shadow forth from the tree. Blessed are we as we move through the darkness and through light. Go now into this world as a beacon of hope and joy. Go in love, go in peace. Now that our worship has ended, our service begins. May it be so. Amen. Blessed be.